describing areas where the teeth of children became so brittle they had to be replaced by dentures by the time they were in their early 20s. Signs were posted at wells and public drinking water sources warning parents not to use the high fluoride water for their children. The trend was to remove fluoride. Many physicians began to question the possible unseen effects of fluoride on the rest of the body. By that time, we were very much aware of the costly damage to livestock and crops downwind of fluoride-emitting smokestacks. Numerous lawsuits have been brought against aluminum, steel, fertilizer, and brick industries. Removing fluoride from community water supplies, protecting workers from job-related illness.
Well, folks, we've got to take a short break. Don't go anywhere, because we'll be right back after this short pause.
Was becoming a costly proposition. If the American public continued to gain an awareness of the potential problem, if they listened to the fears being expressed by several physicians and insisted on zero tolerance, our development as a nation, indeed our survival, would have been threatened. In the 1987 article sent to me by Dr. Thomas of the National Academy of Sciences, chronic fluoride poisoning is described as follows, quote, "The early clinical picture of fluoride toxicity is predominantly symptomatic. Arthralgia, malaise, weakness, and joint stiffness, particularly in the lower limbs and the spine, are among the early features. In industrial exposure, ocular symptoms and headache also occur. In the established skeletal phase of the disease, symptoms and signs of bone and joint involvement are evident both clinically and radiologically. Pain is a cardinal feature due to arthritic lesions and to secondary peripheral nerve involvement." Unquote. According to this book, crippling cases have been reported not only by Rojo, but by many others over the years. In the United Kingdom, France, Morocco, Norway, Czechoslovakia, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Poland, India, China, Canada, Ceylon, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, as well as the United States. They number in the millions in India alone, often in areas having less than 2 parts per million in the water supply and no special industrial exposures. If the American public had been able to see this 1987 article 50 years ago, the word fluoridation would not be in our vocabulary today. The trend to remove fluoride would have continued. The high arthritis rates in Bartlett, Texas might not have been attributed simply to the age of the residents. Dozens of industries would have faced impossible costs. Zero tolerance for fluoride would have meant no aluminum, steel, glass, ceramics, rocket propellants, and refrigerants, no phosphate fertilizers or bricks, no electricity from coal-fired power plants, and at a very crucial time, no mining and processing of uranium. In 1951, when physicians and dentists were complaining about the reckless use of fluoride in some U.S. cities, the National Academy of Sciences formed a panel to determine the relative risks and benefits of water fluoridation. The panel chairman, Kenneth Maxey, was consultant to the Secretary of War and editor for one of the leading industrial health journals. Panel member Francis Hayroth was assistant director of the Kettering Laboratory at the University of Cincinnati. Kettering's business was producing abstracts of the scientific literature on fluoride. These abstracts laundered the original studies, changing dosage figures and study methods in an effort to protect industry. The Academy's decision was based largely on the work of Dean, Cox, and McClure. McClure had reported that his fluoride balance studies furnished evidence that the human body eliminates the major portion of food and waterborne fluoride. However, McClure's method left a lot to be desired. He not only pooled the urine samples in batches of 30 before analysis, but also controlled their fluoride content to be certain that each sample contained the same amount of fluoride rather than the same amount of urine. He stated in his paper, quote, "The rule followed was to have preferably 50 to 100 micrograms of total fluorine in the analytical sample," unquote. The committee discounted the relevance of fluoride from other dietary sources, saying, quote, "The quantity of fluorine ingested in food is a relatively unimportant variable. The average diet contains 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams daily," unquote. In their summary, they stated, quote, "There is no reason to believe that prolonged ingestion of drinking water with a mean concentration below the level causing mottled enamel will have an adverse physiological effect," unquote. And in conclusion, this committee recommends fluoridation. In the spring of 1953, the Food and Nutrition Board of the National Research Council appointed a subcommittee to study the problem of providing an optimum amount of fluoride in the American diet, including the water supply. Panel members included several fluoridation proponents: F.A. Arnold, Director of the National Institute of Dental Research, and Harold C. Hodge, Ph.D. In a letter dated May 25, 1954, Hodge gave his testimony against the Ware Bill, H.R. 2341, which would have prohibited water fluoridation. Hodge explained he had been a consultant to several industrial companies since 1937, had been involved with the Manhattan Project since the spring of 1943, and present at the bikini tests in July 46. Hodge began his work with the Atomic Energy Commission in January of 1947, studying the toxicity of fluorine, uranium, beryllium, and other elements and compounds of special interest to the AEC. At the time of his testimony, he was also chairman of the Technical Advisory Committee on the Fluoridation of Water Supplies of the State of New York Department of Health, and chairman of the Committee on Toxicology of the Division of Chemistry and Chemical Technology of the National Research Council. As part of the letter, Hodge included his chart of fluoride effects, showing that crippling fluorosis is caused by daily doses of 20 to 80 milligrams or more of fluoride for 10 to 20 years. The chart also appears in Hodge's subcommittee report, which became Publication 294, National Research Council, November 1953. Hodge attributes these 20 to 80 milligram figures to row holes and gives mortality statistics as evidence for safety. According to these public documents, the nation relied on the advice of Kenneth Maxey, who represented national security and defense, Hodge, who represented the Atomic Energy Commission, Hayroff, who represented the major fluoride-polluting industries, and Arnold, who represented the National Institute of Dental Research, whose purpose was the study and promotion of fluoridation. They assumed and based their endorsement on the erroneous belief that fluoridation would not contribute enough fluoride to exceed a total daily dose above 1 or 2 milligrams. They accepted McClure's phony balance studies. They accepted Dean's selection of data. They compromised, as we all do, when it is necessary. And they, National Academy of Sciences, and all the others, have been obligated to defend their actions ever since. It seems to me that any reasonably intelligent person who encounters the many newspaper and magazine articles discussing the infighting at EPA over fluoride, or the firing of whistleblower William Marcus, who said fluoridation is a cancer risk, should consider the implications. We've all been exposed to other similar scandals involving government cover-ups. Isn't it obvious that if our government agencies have been working with the nuclear industry to cover up the problems that hampered Washington, or the problems with lead poisoning, or asbestos, or prescription drugs, then they could do the same with fluoridation. Find a calculator, or just a pencil and a scrap of paper, and let's look at those dosage figures again. Not for the 880-pound man described by Hodge in 1953, but for you. Roholm's figures were 0.2 to 0.35 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. You'll find them in page 319 of his book. There are 2.2 pounds in a kilogram. So first, take your weight in pounds and divide by 2.2 to get your weight in kilograms. Now let's use a midpoint between 0.2 and 0.35, an average of 0.275. Multiply your weight in kilograms by 0.275. You could also simply divide your weight in pounds by 8. The answer will be the same. Now you have the daily dose of fluoride capable of producing crippling skeletal fluorosis in a person of your size in 10 to 20 years. If you weigh 120 pounds, that figure is 15 milligrams a day. With every additional 40 pounds, you can add another 5 milligrams. We're in agreement here with the Hodge 1979 reference used by the Public Health Service in their 1991 review. The trouble is that just as I might have been misled by the health department experts in Michigan many years ago, you need to pay very close attention. It's always wise to take a good look at claims made by people trying to sell you something or prove a point. Crippling skeletal fluorosis doesn't happen overnight, just as obesity doesn't result from just one session of overeating. It takes time. Roll homes workers reach the first stage of the disease in only 2.5 years. This is called phase 1. After 4.5 years, phase 2. And after 11 years, phase 3. These time spans are shown in the table on page 211 of the National Academy of Sciences 1971 book called Fluoride. The symptoms were described by the U.S. Public Health Service on page 46 of their 1991 Review of Fluoride Benefits and Risks. Let me read them to you here. Phase 1. Sporadic pain, stiffness of joints, osteosclerosis of pelvis and vertebral column. Phase 2. Chronic joint pain, arthritic symptoms, slight calcification of ligaments, increased osteosclerosis of the campylus bones, with or without osteoporosis of long bones. Phase 3. Crippling fluorosis, limitation of joint movement, calcification of ligaments of the neck and vertebral column, crippling deformities of the spine and major joints, muscle wasting, and neurological defects of compression of the spinal cord. Since the effect of fluoride is cumulative, you can easily determine the effect of smaller doses over longer periods of time. Something like overeating just a little bit every day for several years. The National Academy of Sciences states on page 372 of their 1977 book, Drinking Water and Health, quote, a retention of 2 milligrams a day would mean that an average individual would experience skeletal fluorosis after 40 years, based on an accumulation of 10,000 parts per million in bone ash, unquote. That's phase 3. And since people with healthy kidneys can excrete only about half their total daily dosage of fluoride, a retention of 2 milligrams means an intake of about 4 milligrams. 96 to 98% of dietary fluoride is absorbed. So we're not just talking about fluoridated water, but everything you eat and drink, wherever you live. But what about the other symptoms? The ones that appear before phase 3. After you've divided your weight in pounds by 8 to get your daily dose to produce crippling, let's divide that dose again to see how long it would take to produce phase 1 and 2 with about 5 milligrams a day, a conservative estimate based on typical diets in the studies done in the 1970s and reported by the American Medical Association. If your weight is 120 pounds, your dose is 15 milligrams for less than 3 years to produce phase 1. With only 5 milligrams, 1/3 of 15, you could expect phase 1 to take 3 times as long, less than 9 years. In 18 years or less, you have phase 2, and in 36 years or less, phase 3. This is the part of the story you don't hear. Crippling skeletal fluorosis, phase 3, is the only condition our drinking water standards consider. These are the only symptoms of chronic toxicity the American Dental Association referred to when they quoted the National Academy of Sciences figures of 20 to 80 milligrams. And the 20 milligram figure applies to a person weighing 160 pounds, who can expect to reach the first 2 arthritic phases of chronic fluoride poisoning in less than 5 years. When they say 20 to 80 milligrams for 10 to 20 years, what it really means for a person weighing 160 pounds is 20 milligrams for 11 years. And that's the same as 5 milligrams for 4 times as long. So a person with kidney disease, the risk would be much greater because he'd retain more fluoride. Hodge revised his figures in